And welcome in, folks, to another edition of Open Mic Night. I'm your host, Noah Taluki, and on today's episode, the Lions hiring a couple of assistant coaches that are ex-players in the NFL. We'll dive deeper into that and what that means for the future. Also, looks like Blake Griffin is done in Detroit with the Pistons. We'll dive deeper into that. And also, a little tiny preview. I don't want to go into too much detail, but just a tiny little preview for Tiger spring training because that's sneaking up on us really, really fast. And then after that, we are having a special guest. Finally, after a long, long time, we finally have a guest on the Open Mic Night podcast. It's Dave Birkett, the Lions beat writer for the Detroit Free Press, one of the best in the business. He will join us later on in the show. But thanks again for tuning in as always. And if you're listening on the road, please stay safe. Stay safe out there. I know a lot of places throughout Michigan are getting heavy doses of snow. I know over here in Cleveland we got a lot of snow as well, and the roads are very, very slick. So make sure you're staying safe out there and being careful. Don't want any accidents happening. Hopefully everybody had a great weekend out there as well and staying warm, definitely, because a lot of cold weather over here. I guess if you're listening in the southern states, you're getting really, really good weather, especially in Tampa Bay. I don't know if anybody saw that Super Bowl parade. It was very unique this year because they did one of those boat parades in Tampa, and Tom Brady and company, Rob Gronkowski having a good time and throwing the Super Bowl trophy between boats. Geez, never seen anything like that before. That was a little over the top, in my opinion. But hey, after a long season, a very, very tough season for a lot of teams, got to blow off some steam somehow, I guess. So, but they definitely are enjoying that warm weather. Well, up here in the north, we got some really, really cold and bundling up snowy weather. So make sure you're staying warm out there. But I wanted to get to this Lions news a little bit because the Lions can never escape us, right? I mean, as much as the Lions want to disappear from us, they're the off season and all that. It's just the NFL is such a 24/7 business these days. It's just there's always news popping up. And as much as the Lions season's been over and all the big news with the Stafford trade and the new head coach, new general manager is gone, I mean, it's still making news. And, I told you guys a couple weeks ago, I wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the assistant players or assistant coaches that are on this staff for this season. Eight coaches, including the head coach Dan Campbell, were once players in the NFL. I think this is interesting. Let me go down the list. This is 90 years of experience right here combined with these 8 guys. I mean, remarkable. Obviously, head coach Dan Campbell, he played 11 years in the NFL. Assistant head coach and running backs coach, very respected among players in Philadelphia, Deuce Staley. He played in the NFL for 10 seasons. Offensive coordinator Anthony Lynn, 7 years in the NFL. Mark Brunell, the quarterbacks coach, 19 years. Antoine Randall, who was just hired as the wide receivers coach, he has 9 years and a Super Bowl trophy with Pittsburgh. Hank Fraley, the offensive line coach, with 11 years in the NFL. Aaron Glenn, defensive coordinator, 15 years as a player. And linebacker Calvin Shepard with 8 years, including his last stop in 2018 with the Lions. So 90 years of experience, 8 coaches with NFL experience under their belt. And I think this is saying something right here. Just a clue. And Dave Birkett, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, a little bit more in detail. But I think it's interesting because the Lions are obviously taking a different approach to this. Last time, with the last regime, Bob Quinn, Matt Patricia, we all know how that went. We don't need to get into that. But it just seemed like it was different in the fact that a lot of the coaches that were on the staff were not ex-players. A lot of them just came from New England and were kind of these, like in the basement, like grinders kind of thing, where they didn't necessarily play the game. More so just learning the coaching through Belichick and company, and a lot of Belichick wannabes and all that. But I digress from that. But the point is that the Lions are changing their ways, and a lot of this, I think, maybe has to do with Chris Spielman. Okay, because he's an ex-player. He knows what it's like to play in the NFL. He wants to be able to surround guys with that NFL experience. He wants to be able to surround the players with that. And, I think the players maybe would respond to ex-players more than they would a guy like Matt Patricia, who had never played in the NFL, but was just taking orders from Bill Belichick, basically, and was completely changing the culture for the bad, for the worse. And it seems like now with the Lions' mentality is that they want guys that have been there before and that will respond to the players. And, they know the game from a player's perspective, a lot different than the coach's perspective, but at least gives the Lions an opportunity to go in a different direction and make sure that guys, they know what they're doing in the building. Guys that have been there before. Obviously, Dan Campbell played with the Lions for 3 years, so even he knows the culture, of the Lions. Calvin Shepard, as I mentioned, played for a year, amongst some others. So I think it's an interesting approach, and I really like it. And who knows if this will work out? But I like the approach. I think it's better than the last approach. With Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn and all those geniuses they called them, but none of them had played really in the NFL. So I like this. I really do. I mean, look, I know Mark Brunell, guys like Mark Brunell, Antoine Randall, he was with the Buccaneers, Randall, but never really like a full-time position coach. Mark Brunell has never coached in the NFL at all, but at least he has that experience of playing. They're smart guys. If they weren't, they wouldn't be in this situation. So I trust this right now, and I trust this new regime, and I've said it all along. The signs, and I know it's early. I understand it's early, but the signs right now are pointing in the right direction. Really, really like these hires. Just wanted to talk a little bit about that. We'll get more into that with Dave Birkett later on. But I want to move on now to the Pistons. And I know, don't talk about it a lot. We don't talk about the Pistons a lot on here, but they are in the news a little bit. Speaking of which, Sadiq Bey got, I believe, an award from the NBA for Player of the Week or something like that. I can't remember, but he had a couple of nice performances. We'll see how that pans out for the Pistons, one of Troy Weaver's first draft picks. But it does look like Blake Griffin is done in a Pistons uniform. He is going to be out of the lineup until a resolution on his future is reached. It's tough, though, because he does have a huge, huge contract. He's owed $36.8 million this year. There was also an option for $38.9 million for next year, but a buyout would allow him to seek new teams, and obviously that's what he wants. I'm pretty sure Blake Griffin wants to go to a contender that can win now. And obviously the Pistons are not going to be winning now. I believe they're 6-19 at the time of this recording. So he wants out, and to be quite honest, I'm fine with it. Okay, I totally get it. Now, I think for Blake Griffin, we have to go back to when he was in the blockbuster trade with the Clippers. Pistons 2017-18 season. This was their first year at Little Caesars Arena. They weren't doing too well, and they just, I don't know if Blake Griffin, I don't follow the Pistons enough to know if they thought Blake Griffin was going to be their savior, if he was going to be a missing piece, or who knows, just for people to buy tickets at the new Little Caesars Arena, just something to see, because Blake Griffin obviously has that star power where people want to go see him. This guy dunked over a car, his rookie year in the NBA in the dunk contest. And I don't know, I see the Blake Griffin situation in terms of his career with the Pistons a little bit similar to the career with Matthew Stafford, because, the guy gave it everything. He did. You cannot, criticize this guy's effort. Matthew Stafford, the same thing. Blake Griffin gave it his all for the Pistons, and he, just put the team on the back a lot of nights, and obviously didn't translate to a ton of success. I know they made the playoffs in 2019, but they bowed out 4-0 to the Bucks as an 8 seed. But I think it's just time. It's time to move on. And you tried it, okay? You tried getting a superstar player, maybe sell some tickets at LCA, maybe try to get more wins. But I'm fine with it. And to be quite honest, when Troy Weaver was making all those trades at the beginning of the year during draft time, I thought to myself, hey, deal Blake Griffin, deal Derrick Rose. They've already dealt Derrick Rose. And I'm like, yes, finally they get my wish of dealing Blake Griffin. They just need to get his contract off the books, and I don't care if it's a buyout or anything. As long as he is off this team and off to somewhere else, I'm fine with it. And Blake wants to go to a championship contender. He's been, he's at the point of his career where he's getting older and he's getting more banged up, and he wants to go get a ring. I don't mind it. Go ahead. Team's not going to win with you anyways. I don't mind Blake Griffin leaving, and I think it just better helps the Pistons for the future anyways. He was definitely, I thought, after Stafford left, I guess technically he could have been the face of Detroit sports for a little bit, but that whole thing's another question. Who is the face of Detroit sports now? That's for a different podcast. But like I said, I'm happy that Blake Griffin is finally going to be gone, and go get a ring. He deserves it. 6-time NBA All-Star, left it all on the floor for the Pistons. I do not mind his effort at all, but the injury bug was getting to him a lot, and Pistons weren't really going to do anything with him anyways. So I don't mind, and thank you, Blake, for all your services to the Pistons. Want to end really fast before we get to our interview with Dave Birkett about the Tigers' spring training. They will have 29 spring training games this season, which is really good. Really, really happy that baseball is going to be back. And it's going to be in sunny Florida and Joker Marchant Stadium. Always a great place to be. And that's always been something I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to go down and see the Tigers in spring training. I mean, man, I just really wish I could do it. That's definitely a bucket list item, and I believe they've been in Lakeland there for longer than any MLB team has been at one particular spring training location. So it's fun. The weather's nice. Baseball is just in the air, and it seems like baseball just ended yesterday. It always seems like baseball is the shortest off season because basically they're just getting right back at it in February. Their season ends September. If you make the playoffs, October. And then you just get a couple months off and bang, you're back. And I know some Tigers were playing in the Mexican winter leagues and all that. So baseball just seems like a nonstop sport when you think about it, just the training and all the baseball that you play. But I'm looking forward to it. I've always loved going to Tiger games, and I love sitting down and just watching a good old-fashioned baseball game at Comerica Park. So, and I think there will be fans, there's supposed to be at least, at Comerica Park this year, obviously at spring training as well, so that should be fun as well. Yeah, but 29 games. I won't get too much in detail with the team. That's going to be for a later podcast, but I know there's not a whole lot of expectations this season for the Tigers' first-year manager, A.J. Hinch. Go back and listen to one of our podcasts I did with Jake Biding, who was the former strength and conditioning coach for the Astros. We talk a lot more about AJ in that podcast. But obviously a big story every year will be Miguel Cabrera. Every year it seems like he's in shape. He's hitting home runs and all that in spring training, but doesn't seem to really work out at least for the last couple of years in the regular season. But obviously Miguel Cabrera will be a story. The prospects will be a big story as well. Casey Mize, what is he going to do in year 2? Tarek Skubal, Matt Manning, will he be worked in the rotation in 2021? The Tigers did acquire a couple of players, not big splashes like, the Prince Fielders or anything like that, like they used to, 10 years ago when Mike Ilitch loved to spend. But, I think this team may be a little bit better than people realize. I know last year didn't go as planned, especially in the shortened season, but we'll have to see. I really like the catcher Wilson Ramos that they acquired. I know catcher has been sort of a weakness a little bit, especially since Jake Rogers hasn't really seemed to pan out lately, and Austin Romine is just a 1 year deal, and all that. So I'm definitely looking forward to some Tiger baseball this season.
And joining us now here on the Open Mic Night podcast is Dave Birkett, the 3-time Michigan Sports Writer of the Year and the Lions beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. He is also a Pro Football Hall of Fame voter. Dave, thank you so much for joining us here.
Hey, my pleasure. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm doing well, and I'm really, really excited to do this interview with you. And before we start talking about the Lions, I really want to know, I'm curious, how did you get into sports writing, and how did you, become the Lions beat writer?
Wow. Well, getting into sports writing, honestly, my mom would tell you that I was doing it at an early age. Like I remember reading the Free Press when I was a kid, or she has these in my scrapbooks. I don't know that I remember it, but like reading the Free Press as a kid, what happened in the Pistons game the night before, and then writing my own story. Isaiah Thomas scored, 24 points or whatever it was. And so I think something I always thought I could do. And when I realized I wasn't going to make the NBA, I wanted to, stay involved with sports somehow. And so it was either this or coaching. And I guess I get to do a little bit of both since I coach my daughter's team, my son's teams right now. So, but no, that's really what it was, something I went to school for a long time ago. And as for, getting into the Lions, look, I covered a lot of things at a lot of different levels. I mean, high schools, I worked out in Virginia for a year at a really small paper. I covered Michigan and Michigan State. I did some backup Pistons stuff. And then really I kind of caught my break. We had a writer named Steve Pate who left the Oakland Press. I was at the Oakland Press, and James Walker was my boss at the time, and he trusted me to cover the beat, or that was in motion, I guess, to cover the beat when James had left. And then, just fortunate enough to do a good enough job covering that. The Free Press and some of the other bigger papers saw me doing that at the level that I was at. And 2010, the Free Press hired me and been there ever since. Like it or not, I guess, whether they want me there or not, I'm still hanging on these days.
And you've become the 3-time Michigan Sports Writer of the Year as well during that time. And I want to transition a little bit more over to the Hall of Fame. As I mentioned before, you are a Pro Football Hall of Fame voter. For somebody that doesn't know, how do you become a Pro Football Hall of Fame voter? And, how does the whole process work with ballots and all that?
Yeah, I think there's, people probably don't realize, because you see Major League Baseball, there's 1,000 voters. If you're in the baseball writers, a lot of those people vote. And football, it's a much more selective process. There's 48 voters. There's one for every NFL city, 2 if there's 2 teams in the city for New York. And then there's 16 at-large voters. And I happen to be the Detroit representative. And, it's been great. I guess this is my 6th or 7th year, doing this for the Lions. And this was the first year I actually got to present someone, Calvin Johnson, the hometown, typically where the player spent the bulk of his career, is the writer that does the presentation for the selection committee. So this was my very first one. It's been a great process, just sort of getting to be a part of that. And it really is, special, I think, when these are some of the greatest that the game has ever seen, and it's really splitting hairs, but helping make some of these people's dreams come true to get into Canton. It's not an honor that I take lightly.
Now, you mentioned Calvin Johnson. He just got inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the 7th wide receiver in the modern era to be on that first ballot. Just talk about, how deserving is Calvin Johnson of that first ballot Hall of Fame? Because not many receivers, as I mentioned, have gotten it on their first try.
Yeah, no, Kelvin is the 7th or 8th, I think it is. And no, you're right. Look, going into the process, I'll be honest, I as much as I thought Kelvin deserved to be in on the first ballot, just based on having covered, most of his career, the things that he could do, as special of a talent as he was, and what he was able to accomplish on the field, the reverence in which, opponents and teammates and opposing coaches and everyone spoke of him. It was not a slam dunk, just for that reason, that voters typically, some voters, they don't want to enshrine too many first-year eligible players. And then the receiver position is one that's historically had to wait. Randy Moss was the last first-ballot receiver before Calvin. Before that, it was Jerry Rice. And before that, it was Steve Largent. So, there were, I guess, 3 before Calvin in the past 35 years. But Calvin, to me, he was, like I said, a very worthy candidate, because, this is a guy that, in my estimation, I think talking to people around the league, he changed the way the receiver position was viewed. He was not a diva. He was this big body, 6'5" receiver who could do it all. He became, the guy that a generation of receivers sort of had on their wall, the poster of who they wanted to be. And so I think you take all those things into account. You take into account the special things that he did on the field. And really that's why I think he ended up being a first ballot selection at the end of the day.
Want to transition over to this current Lions staff. Of course, as you know, you're on the beat. You're in Allen Park a lot. This new staff, there's a lot of new additions. Obviously, Brad Holmes, new general manager, Dan Campbell, new head coach. a very different culture now that the Lions have. Do you think, at least as of now, and I know the draft hasn't happened, we haven't gotten it in free agency, but do you think right now, at least the first signs, do you think this is a good move for the Lions?
Well, I like the direction, that they're heading. And I've used this word before, that hope. I think Lions fans, and you probably know it from being up here in Detroit, right, that it's been too long since a lot of people have had hope. They've looked at what's gone on and they haven't been able to really see this franchise going in the right direction towards being a consistent, Super Bowl contender, frankly. And I think it's far too early to say that this organization is going to be that. But I think in tearing down and dealing Matthew Stafford and acquiring these draft picks and bringing good people into the organization, I think the Lions have they're starting to go down the right path. There's many forks in the road, so they have to make sure they stay on the right path. But look, when you're collecting draft picks, when you admit to yourself that as much as we want to win and we're going to try to win in 2021, that our window of opportunity is still a few years down the road. And again, by maybe going against the grain and bringing in a general manager in Brad Holmes and a coach in Dan Campbell, who wouldn't have been the first choice for other organizations, but you think have star potential. I think you're doing the right things to hopefully get you to where you and your fan base and everyone that's followed this team wants you to be.
You mentioned Brad Holmes as well, and a couple weeks ago we actually had Luther Bradley on the podcast, his uncle, ex-Detroit Lion. And one of the things that he talked about in the interview was, besides Brad being a great talent and evaluator, one of his other strengths was communication skills. He was a communications major at North Carolina A&T, also was a PR intern for the Rams, and I'm sure you know that. We know that the communication with the Lions the last few years has not been the best, and so I want to ask you, do you think with this new regime with Brad Holmes and company, with his communications background, being able to communicate with other people, do you think we're going to see better communication in Allen Park?
That has been a theme really in these hires and with both men. So I think that is, look, it's really a fact of life. It's probably in any business, but specifically in the NFL. When you go through a regime change, a lot of times you're looking to hire the opposite of what you just had, right? There were reasons why things didn't work in the past, and that was one of them. And you mentioned, Brad's background and his effectiveness as a communicator. I wrote a story for the Free Press Monday about Dan Campbell and some of the things that he learned in terms of communicating, things that he learned from an old Navy SEAL that the Miami Dolphins had, just in terms of the value of being up front and confronting whatever issues may be there in doing that directly with everyone involved. And so I think that's definitely something that was in the back of the Lions' mind as they went into this hiring process, that, hey, we need to make sure we have a much more clear line of communication from the players to the coach to the front office to ownership. Everyone's sort of involved. And I think that's why you see both Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell embody some of those traits.
I want to transition over now to the big trade that happened a few weeks ago. Matthew Stafford for the 2 first-round picks, the 3rd-round pick, and Jared Goff from the Rams. Shipped him off to L.A., kind of what he wanted. He already has a home out there in Newport Beach. I want to know your thoughts. Are you a fan of this trade? Are you a fan of what the Lions got back in return? And how do you think Jared Goff will be as a Lion? 12 years with Matthew Stafford, it's going to be a lot different, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, let me put this out front. I do like the trade. If I was GM, I would have valued, I think, getting a present day top 10 pick, the Carolina Panthers trade. Let's say it's number 8 in this year's draft, plus a mid-round pick, 4 or 5, whatever that was going to be, plus quarterback Teddy Bridgewater. I would have valued that a little bit more than the 2 future firsts. But having said that, I like the value that the Lions got in return for Matthew Stafford. It's tough to argue with getting 2 first-round picks. And again, it ties into what Dan Campbell told me last month, that, as much as they want to win now, they realize the window for opportunity for this team is further down the road. And so they are taking coaching staff, front office, everyone involved is taking a long-term approach to this. And I think by getting the package that they got and going down that path, I think now they're set up to make even more of those moves should they present themselves. Look, if Carolina at number 8 wants a quarterback and there's 4 that are probably going to go in the top 10 and one of those guys is there. Well, the Lions at number 7, they're in prime position to deal down and maybe acquire more draft picks. And really what this team needs, what this organization needs for the future is a wealth of draft picks from which to build. Now you have to hit on the players that you take. And I think you have to have some really blue chip, premium talent. And that's why I think a top 10 pick would have been my preference. You can still deal down with one of those picks had you got that. But I like what they got. The Jared Goff portion of the trade, look, I see Jared Goff as being a placeholder. I still think the Lions need to nail the quarterback position at some point here. But Jared Goff is certainly a serviceable quarterback, and maybe there's a little bit of upside there. I mean, he's 26 years old. He played in a Super Bowl a couple of years ago. So I think he can be that bridge. And while you're the bridge quarterback, and especially with a new regime, you don't want to be the 2-14 team in the NFL. So I think the Lions are at least going to hold their head above water with Jared Goff at quarterback. So I think there are some things to like, but I don't think it solves the quarterback position long-term for the Lions. And then the Matthew Stafford element, just to add to that too. Look, I think there are players around the league and who have played for this organization that realize that the Lions did right by Matthew Stafford to send him there rather than to send him to Carolina or New England or some of these other suitors. So that doesn't have much present day value, but I do think that there's some goodwill there that maybe the organization needed to establish.
Dave Birkett, the Lions beat writer for the Detroit Free Press, with us. Want to talk a little bit more about the staff as well. We heard earlier in the week Antoine Randall has been hired as wide receivers coach. We saw earlier that Mark Brunell was hired as quarterbacks coach. There's other ex-players as well, on the staff. Obviously, Dan Campbell, an ex-player. Do you think this will work? There's, because some of them have not ever had positions like this before, like Mark Brunell. He's never been a coach in the NFL, just a player. So do you think this will work out in the end? Will it help the Lions at all?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Antoine Randall has never been a full-time position coach, even though obviously he was with Tampa. Kelvin Shepard, essentially going to be the outside linebackers coach, has never coached in the NFL before. I think I think there will be some growing pains there and some growth that the staff will make, but that's part of this whole thing, right? If you're looking 2 or 3 years down the road, then maybe you have the luxury of bringing some good people on staff and having them learn on the job. So look, as Dan had said, I don't know that he went into it just straight looking for ex-players. I do think there is a value there for, the current players to be learning from someone who did it, who was in their shoes. But some of the best teachers are guys who never played the game at that level. So I do think you have to strike a balance, and whether it works or not, it's cliche, but only time will tell. I like, Aaron Glenn has gotten good reviews. I think everyone knows what Anthony Lynn is. I would have liked to have seen, one of these bright young offensive minds, just because I think that's the way the game has evolved. But I'm willing to give Anthony Lynn a chance too and see if he's more than just the run first guy that he was in Buffalo.
I want to talk a little bit more about the culture shift. We talked about that earlier with Dan Campbell and all that. And, you were there. I would love to know, at least as of now, what has been the biggest difference in the culture of Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn versus Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes right now? What's the biggest difference?
It's tough to say right now because I think the biggest knock on the Patricia regime was the way that he dealt with the players, right? And when they were in there and, just the way he treated them. And the players obviously haven't been around Dan Campbell yet, and they won't be probably until the summer. I don't know how much they will do in the spring. So, what I can say about the culture, in Detroit is that, look, Jim Caldwell, I thought he was a good coach, and players certainly respected him. I didn't know that he was going to be the guy to take them to 12 wins consistently and compete for the Super Bowl. But he did some really good things, and players really responded to him. And then when Matt Patricia came in, players, for lack of a better term, someone had used this term with me, they sort of saw him as a bully, right? That he was, he had to get his way, but he had to flex to get his way. And okay, these are my rings, and this is why you have to do it my way. And, players just didn't respond to that after the way that Jim Caldwell treated them like men. And I'll give Patricia a little bit of credit. I do think he grew. The first year was terrible all the way around. Second year, so. The third year was better, but it was too late by that point. And so I'm anxious to see and interested to see how Dan Campbell, how he's received by players. And to your point earlier, being a former player and having talked to guys who have played for him, I think the locker room will appreciate that and value that and respond to him right off the bat.
Final question for you, Dave. At this point, obviously it's early, but the draft is coming in April, as you know. If the draft was today, say, who exactly would the Lions take? Because I have people here in Cleveland that are telling me, like, okay, well, they need to take a quarterback or they need to take a defensive player. If Kenny Galladay leaves, they need a wide receiver. So there's all kinds of different options, I feel. You even mentioned trading down. If the draft were today, what should the Lions do?
Yeah, no, you're right about that. And, look, I think two things first and foremost have to be at the front of the Lions' mind. Number one is finding the quarterback that you can build around, right? And again, I think Jared Goff is a placeholder. And so I think if you identify one of those top four quarterbacks, right? Trevor Lawrence won't be there, but Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance. If the guy that you like best among those three and you think can be a future star in the NFL is there at 7, I think you have to take him. I don't know if that guy's going to be there at 7. And I don't know if that guy is going to be someone that you as an organization identify as being a future star. But let's say it's Trey Lance, right? Young guy, hasn't played much, raw, needs a lot of seasoning. Well, you're in the perfect spot to grab him and do that because you don't need him to play right away. So that would be my primary objective there. If that guy is not there, I think a trade down is the next best bet for the Lions because, again, you're in a spot where you're taking a long-term approach to building this thing. And so extra draft capital this year, next year can go a long way towards helping you do that. So now, again, that takes 2 to tango, obviously. So there's no telling if that will be there. Number 3 for me would be, sitting at 7 and taking that top defensive player / wide receiver, whoever it is, because you do need help at all those positions. So, Micah Parsons, Jamar Chase, either of the Alabama receivers. I think there's a lot of guys who could be in the mix for the Lions at the end of the day, maybe even an offensive tackle, because Anthony Lynn did say, that they're a little light on the edges when he talked to reporters last week. I think there are a lot of options, but that's sort of how I would stack the board if I was the Lions in terms of my objectives and the possibilities of those talents being there.
Dave Birkett, Lions beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. You can follow him on Twitter at Dave Birkett. Also, read his articles on freep.com. He does a great job. Dave, thank you so much for joining us here again.
My pleasure. We'll do it again soon. Once we know a little bit more about this regime and maybe who they draft and everything.
I want to thank Dave Birkett again for coming on. That was an awesome interview. Really, really good Lions insight. And I really appreciate it. He's one of my favorite beat writers on the Lions beat, and it's always a joy to read his awesome things in the Free Press. Yep, Freep.com is definitely awesome to view Dave Birkett's stories. But I want to thank everybody again for tuning in. Make sure to check out all the other podcasts on the network, Michigan Podcast. I know there's a new gambling podcast out there with John, and he does it with his buddy Phil, if you're into that. Obviously, the Doc and Jock podcast, also the wrestling podcast. There's a lot of great ones. Fan Report. They all do a great job, and it's great to be a part of the Detroit sports scene, and it's been awesome. I've been on this since June, and I've really enjoyed doing this, and I've gotten a lot of great guests. I go back and listen to some of my other ones with other ex-Detroit Lions, and I'm working on a couple basketball guests possibly, and once we get into baseball season, maybe even some of them. So I'm excited for the future, and I'm always looking to bring guests on. So looking forward to entertaining you guys. It's a lot of fun doing this, and really appreciate all of the support. Thanks again, folks, for tuning in. Join us next week only on Open Mic Night.